So it's Tuesday afternoon. I've deliberately held off until now for 24 hours or so since the whole grooming gang scandal, national inquiry, Yvette Cooper speaking in Parliament, blah, 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 hit the news yesterday afternoon. And I held off for a few reasons. I wanted to see exactly what all of the details were, read some of the report, read some of the other reports and some of the takes on that report that were coming out, see what some of the politicians had to say, and just sort of see how the dust settled a little bit before commenting on it myself. So what is my take on it? Well, the overriding take on it is that this is very much a result and a factor of the entire apparatus of the establishment going out of its way to deliberately hide and cover this up. They will all claim that it's down to a lack of information, misunderstanding, mistakes being made, but that's utter bullshit. And when I say the entire apparatus, I mean all of the following people. So politicians, Westminster politicians, from MPs, probably right up to cabinet level or even prime ministerial level, but certainly loads of local politicians, loads of local councillors, and all of the attendant civil servants that back those people up, both in Whitehall and Westminster and in the local councils. All of the police that investigated, the senior commanders of police forces and the Crown Prosecution Services that were involved in this, all of the care services that got involved in it, all of the social services that got involved in it, NHS staff that treated these girls, everyone, even down to people that, councillors and people that were the licensing parties that licensed taxi firms, etc. in these towns. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people are totally culpable, and they will all try and insist it was based on mistakes, based on misunderstandings, based on a lack of knowledge. They're all lying. They're absolutely lying. They knew what was going on, and either because they were bullied into it by their superiors, or because they had no moral fibre and no moral framework and no backbone, they refused to acknowledge it. They hid it, and in many cases they covered it up, and in some cases they actually were taking part. And they all need to be held to account and have their toes held to the flames. Why did they cover it up? A variety of reasons. In many of the politicians' cases, it was because this all happened in certain constituencies where there were very, very high levels of certain demographics, and they wouldn't do anything to endanger those votes. They were more than prepared to allow these girls to be sold into servitude and slavery and horrific abuse rather than potentially risk their votes. In the case of the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, it's because they were much more concerned with and much more worried by potentially being labelled as racist or institutionally racist and potentially having trouble on the streets than they were about these girls. So they were more than happy for these girls to be tortured, raped, abused, drugged, rather than run the risk of them themselves actually being labelled or for there to be any widespread civil unrest on the streets. So they just effectively threw them to the wolves. In the case of the social services, again, I think it's partly institutional liberalism, leftism runs rife throughout that industry, and they didn't want to be labelled as potentially being racist, and so they were happy to just turn a blind eye to what was going on with these girls. The NHS, same sort of thing. They were treating these girls. They must have seen what was happening to them, must have seen the injuries, and just were told probably by their superiors, don't feed it back to the police, don't report on it. The taxi licensing firms, they know what these taxis were being used for. They know that men were getting a licence in one town and then going and driving in another town. They knew, and they just carried on licensing these people. They all are culpable. It's unbelievable. And then you look at the lies told by the media and politicians. So the biggest lie was, and we heard this numerous times, even the Home Office said this, well, the majority of men taking part in these crimes are white. The figure quoted often was 85% of the perpetrators are white. But it now comes out that actually the data was either not collected at all, was completely faulty. At best, in a third of the cases, was the ethnicity data and background of the people carrying these crimes out recorded. Only a third. So that means in 2/3 of cases, They've got no record of who did it. So you can bet your bottom dollar in the third of the cases that they did record. Why did they record those ones? Well, quite probably because the ethnicity of the people committing those crimes wasn't going to upset the apple cart. They were white men, and so they recorded them. But that means that 66% weren't recorded, and it's very likely there was a reason they didn't record that 66% or whatever it was. Because they would have caused problems. Because if that data had come out, it would have caused absolute murders, and so they didn't record it. But how do you not record the data? Even if you don't ask the question about actual ethnic background, religious background, surely just by looking at the names you can tell. Somebody must have a list of the names, surely to God. If somebody's called Paweł Kowalski, they're probably going to be Eastern European or Polish. If somebody's called John Smith, there's probably a fair chance that they're white British. If somebody's called Mohammed Khan, there's a fairly fair bet that there could well be a Pakistani Muslim. So even if they didn't record the specific data, they must have the details. Why are they not revealing that? They must have it. And then it also comes to light that thousands of these cases didn't ever even make it to court. Why did they not make it to court? Well, because unbelievably, the police and the Crown Prosecution Service said that it was consensual. Consensual. These were 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls having sexual intercourse with men that were 25, 30, 40, 45, 50, up to 64 years of age, I think was one of them I saw. And that's consensual. But even if it is consensual, it's still breaking the law. It's still against the law. So why were there no prosecutions? Well, we know why. Because the police and the Crown Prosecution Service utterly bottled it and didn't want to cause waves. So now, if they reinvestigate, there's potentially thousands and thousands and thousands more cases and hopefully more convictions. The whole thing is the biggest scandal and the biggest cover-up in 100 years in this country. It's absolutely appalling. Appalling. So now they're going to hold a national inquiry. I'm going to make another entirely different video about that national inquiry because it won't be what it says on the tin. Mark my words. It will be cover-up part 37. That's what's going to happen. And even if anything does come of it, it's going to take 3, 4, 5, 6 years. This government will be long gone by then. Absolute disgrace. Watch my other video about the inquiry, because I'll tell you a few things on that you may well not have read unless you've dug into this quite deeply, and you'll be shocked. And the other final thing I'd like to add is, on my other page, The Ordinary Guy Rant 2, I've made a video about the man I can't really name on here, the man from Luton, because he has been utterly vindicated. And I've made a video all about that, which hopefully TikTok won't take down, and hopefully they won't take this one down as well. So let's see what happens.